Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and in today's video, I'm continuing my self-indulgent and slightly insane series of ranking all the items in Dragon Age Origins. I started with the armors. This time, it's the weapons turn. This includes shields because they're worn in the offhand slot where you can also wield weapons. There are a lot of weapons in the game, so get yourself a snack or drink and get comfortable because this is a feature film length video. Feel free to keep it on your second monitor or in the background while you do something else. Though, of course, if you're interested in seeing the items in-game, there will be screenshots of all of them. Yes, I manually did that. It took a couple of hours. And if you want to skip around for specific weapon types, maybe if you're trying to figure out which weapons are good for a particular build you want to play, the timestamps for that are in the description. Before we get into this insanely long ranking, I'd like to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated, but not required. I am always thankful, even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. First and foremost, I'll be rating everything within categories because that's the easiest way to have neat timestamps and keep everything organized. I'll be giving each weapon or item set a score from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. However, these scores only hold up within each category. You can't compare apples to oranges or, in this case, longswords to daggers. I will also not score basic weapons, aka the ones that don't have any stats associated with them. They'd all get a score of 1 since they have nothing to make them better than something with actual stats. Hopefully that explains the scoring system. If not, I'm sure you'll figure it out as we go. Starting with longswords. They are one-handed melee weapons that deal high amounts of damage but are lower in armor penetration and critical chance. They are the jack-of-all-trades of melee weapons and can be used by weapon and shield and dual-wielding warriors, and possibly even dual-wielding rogues in strength-dex hybrid builds. Asturian's Might is tier 3 or tier 6 depending on your level and grants +2 damage, +1 armor penetration, weakens nearby darkspawn, and has 1 to 2 rune slots. It's obtained as part of the Warden's Keep DLC if you finish the Ancient History side quest. The weakens darkspawn property isn't implemented in the base game, but if you have Dane's Fixes, it implements a penalty to attack and defense to all nearby darkspawn, which is very useful. These stats are pretty nice for a warrior, especially a tank in darkspawn fights, but I wouldn't use it on a hybrid rogue since it's a bit lacking in damage, offensive stats, and rune slots. 4 out of 5. Blightblood is tier 7 and grants +3% melee crit chance, +2 attack, +10% crit or backstab damage, a poison effect dealing 5 nature damage per hit, and has 3 rune slots. This is a DLC-related item that you can have in your inventory from the start of the game if you complete the Darkspawn Chronicles. It can only be used by a warrior or rogue, but frankly I don't see why an arcane warrior would want to use it anyway. The stats aren't terrible, but the nature damage doesn't really do very much. Most enemies in the game are resistant or even immune to nature damage, and then the rest of the stats are too small to make up for it. 3 out of 5. I pretty much always just destroy it or sell it because there's far better swords to use. But you could still find it useful in certain cases like dealing with human, elven, and dwarven enemies who don't have resistances to nature damage. Plus, it's free. Free stuff is always nice. Borrowed Longsword is tier 1 without strength requirements and grants +1 armor penetration and +6 attack. You obtain this as part of the City Elf origin. It's a very good early game sword due to the bonus to attack, and the best part is that it doesn't have a strength requirement, so you can use it on rogues without having to put any points into strength. However, due to being an early game weapon, it gets a 2 out of 5 since you will replace it fairly quickly afterwards. Darkspawn Longsword is weird. It has stats, but they're bad. It's variable tier and grants +0.5 armor penetration and -1 dexterity. It sells for a decent amount though. The only situation you'd want to use this is if you don't have any weapons. Otherwise, even the basic longsword is better since it doesn't give you a dex penalty. Dex is particularly important for melee characters due to influencing your defense, so the Darkspawn Longsword gets a 1 out of 5. Duncan's Sword is tier 5 to 7 and grants +3 willpower, +3 cunning, +2 combat stamina regen, +4 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 to 3 rune slots. It's obtained in the Return to Ostagar DLC. This is a perfect sword for a strength-dex hybrid rogue due to the extra cunning, willpower, and stamina regen to allow you to use your abilities more often, And of course, the damage versus Darkspawn is always nice since they're the most numerous enemy type. However, I wouldn't really use this weapon on a warrior because warriors don't care for cunning, so that's a completely useless stat, only granting you a tiny amount of armor penetration. 3 out of 5. Dwin's Sword is tier 2 and grants plus 2% spell resistance, messy kills, which only increases your chance of doing a special execution animation when you kill an enemy, and has 1 rune slot. You can obtain the sword from Dwin's corpse if you kill him in his house or if he dies during the attack at nightfall in Redcliffe. But honestly, there's not really any reason to get the sword other than to sell it. The spell resistance bonus is tiny, messy kills doesn't do anything, and 1 rune slot is shitty. 1 out of 5. Not significantly better than a basic sword. Family Sword is tier 2 and grants plus 1 damage and plus 4 attack. It's obtained during the Human Noble origin and is restricted to warriors and rogues. This is a great early game sword that I think pretty much everyone who chooses the Human Noble origin wishes could be upgradable so that you could keep using it, since it's your most important family keepsake. As it stands, however, you will want to replace it unless you're fine with using a very weak sword later on. So it gets a 2 out of 5, as much as I love it. Fine Dwarven Blade is a different story. It's tier 2 and grants plus 2 attack. That's it. You can obtain it as part of the Dwarf Noble origin from Harrowmont if you convince him of your innocence. It's kind of weird this is the weapon the Dwarf Noble gets, but then the Dwarf Commoner gets the Idukan Mace as a gift from Duncan, which is better. This is a very shitty sword, only marginally better than a basic one due to the slight attack bonus. I don't consider that to be relevant enough, so it gets a 1 out of 5. Gorham's Sword is tier 5 or tier 1 if you're using Dane's Fixes, and grants plus 2 damage versus Darkspawn. Without Dane's Fixes due to being tier 5, it also has 2 rune slots, but frankly that doesn't save it from being awful. The plus 2 damage versus Darkspawn isn't enough to make this much better than a basic sword. I'd still choose this over the Fine Dwarven Blade because at least you'd be dealing extra damage to Darkspawn, but that's about it. 2 out of 5. Barely. Imperial Edge is tier 6 and grants plus 2 damage, plus 3% melee crit chance, and plus 6 attack. It can have either a 0 or 2 rune slots due to a bug, but Dane's Fixes solves the rune slot issue since a tier 6 weapon should always have 2 rune slots. You can obtain 2 of these as part of the Unrest in the Alienage questline during the Landsmeet in Denrim. One drops from the Supervisor in the Hospice, and the other is in a chest in the Taventer warehouse. It's a fairly powerful base game sword, the only downside being that you obtain it very late in the game. There's just finishing up the Landsmeet and the final battle left afterwards. Due to it getting used very little, Imperial Edge gets a 3 out of 5. Keening Blade is tier 7 and grants plus 2 armor penetration, plus 6 attack, plus 3 cold damage, and has 3 rune slots. It's dropped by Gaxkang in the Quaint Hovel in Denrim as part of the Unbound side quest. It's restricted to warriors only, which is a bit strange since I do think arcane warriors might have also liked using it, but oh well. The Unbound side quest is a bit annoying since you have to go pick up some clues from around the world, so I don't do it in 90% of my playthroughs. Gaxkang is a super difficult boss to defeat unless you cheese the fight with something like the Mana Clash spell. And to top it all off, the sword is good but nothing special. Cold damage isn't as useful as you'd think since undead are resistant to it and they make up a significant portion of the enemies in the game. Armor penetration generally isn't something that longsword wielding warriors care that much about, and in fact most enemies have fairly low armor scores, so armor penetration doesn't even matter very much in general. For this reason, Keening Blade gets a 3 out of 5. For me personally it's a 1 since I don't bother using it, but it has some value. Merrick's Blade is tier 5 to tier 7, but most importantly doesn't have any strength requirements, so you can use this on a warrior or rogue without worrying about your strength score. It grants plus 0.75 combat health and stamina regen, plus 6 damage versus Darkspawn, weakens nearby Darkspawn, and has 2 to 3 rune slots. It's looted from Kaelin's chest in the Return to Ostagar DLC. This is truly an amazing sword to fight Darkspawn with, especially if you have Dane's Fixes, which implements the weakening effect. But on top of this, it's also part of the Kaelin's arm set together with Kaelin's shield, which makes it extremely useful for warriors and arcane warriors. I'll go into detail why when I discuss weapon sets, but Merrick's Blade easily gets a 5 out of 5. Oathkeeper is tier 3 and grants plus 1.5 armor penetration, plus 10% to healing effects received, and has 1 rune slot. It's obtained in Lothering if you complete all the Chanter's Board quests. The healing bonus doesn't work in the vanilla game, but it's properly implemented by Dane's Fixes. This is a good early game sword, and is particularly good due to the rune slot, since until then you probably only have tier 1 or tier 2 weapons. The armor penetration isn't anything to write home about though, so you'll want to replace this with more relevant bonuses. 2 out of 5. Saw Sword is variable tier and grants +1 damage and +1% melee crit chance. Normally it doesn't have any rune slots even at higher tiers, but Dane's Fixes solves this. You can obtain the sword in various places, as random or guaranteed loot, as well as in Caesar's normal and special stock in Denerim. It's a decent sword, but I can't say the stats are amazing since they're so tiny. With rune slots at least it's alright if you get it at a higher tier, but it can't compare to the better weapons. 2 out of 5. Sir Garland's sword is tier 2 and grants +2 attack and +10 physical resistance. You can obtain this in the Ostagar camp by lying to the Elven Messenger. This is super useful early on for a weapon and shield or dual-wielding warrior due to the physical resistance, since it will help the warrior resist physical effects like knockdown and stun. Of course, you can also use it temporarily on a rogue for similar reasons to try to make them a bit harder to knock down or stun, but I recommend it on a warrior for best results. Despite being an early game weapon, its usefulness nets it a 3 out of 5. Spellweaver is the only arcane warrior restricted weapon. It's tier 6 and grants +5 magic, +1 combat mana regen, +10% spell resistance, +3 electricity damage, and has 2 rune slots. It's obtained by killing the Cultist Overseer during the Urn of Sacred Ashes main quest. I love this sword for my arcane warriors. It looks cool since it uses the Elven Darmisan model, and it has good stats. Not that many enemies have electricity resistance, and you can pair the electricity damage with other elemental runes and spells that reduce enemy resistances. While this is an arcane warrior only weapon, I'll still give Spellweaver a score of 5 out of 5 because it's very good. The only other weapon I'd use as an arcane warrior is Merrick's Blade in combination with Kaelin's Shield, due to the huge mana regen and damage bonuses. Starfang is tier 8, a special tier most items in the game don't go up to. It grants +3 dexterity, +3 damage, +2.5 armor penetration, and has 3 rune slots. You can obtain this in the Warden's Keep DLC by bringing a meteor metal ore from a random encounter to the blacksmith Mikhail Dryden and asking him to craft you a longsword. Keep in mind you can only get one version of Starfang, a longsword or a greatsword, so you'll have to choose which one you prefer. I like this one for a dual-wielding warrior due to the extra dex, or a damaging tank like my Berserker Reaver hybrid build. The bonus damage is great, and the AP is a significant enough amount. 5 out of 5. The Green Blade is tier 4 and grants +10% nature resistance, +6 damage versus beasts, and has 1 rune slot. It can be obtained in Redcliffe as part of the side quest A Missing Child. However, the stats kind of suck. The damage versus beast is really only useful in a few areas in the game, in the Brazilian Forest and Ruins versus wolves, werewolves, bears, and spiders, in a few fights that include a larger number of Mabari, like the Kennel Room in Redcliffe Castle, and possibly in a few areas in the Deep Roads and fights against Deepstalkers. I'm not really sure whether dragons also count as beasts or are only counted in the dragon category. I recommend using this only in fights against multiple beast-type enemies, if at all. Even so, as a tier 5 weapon that only has 1 rune slot and otherwise nature resistance, which isn't useful, you're better off using weapons that have more rune slots filled with elemental damage runes. 3 out of 5, barely. Topsider's Honor is tier 7 and grants +20% spirit resistance, +6 damage versus undead, and has 3 rune slots. It's obtained as part of the side quest An Admirable Topsider in the Deep Roads. Due to the damage versus undead, this would be great during the quests in Redcliffe, some areas in the Brazilian Forest and Ruins, as well as Broken Circle and the Urn of Sacred Ashes, since you can find a significant amount of undead there. However, it's obtained super late in the Deep Roads, which tends to be the last area to complete before the lands meet. Plus, you can essentially mimic this effect by adding Cold Iron runes to a weapon, since that also grants you damage versus undead. A very strange bonus to put on a sword found in the Deep Roads. I don't know what the item designers were thinking. 3 out of 5. If you finish the quest earlier, you'll get more use out of it. There are a lot of solid longswords for warriors, rogues, and arcane warriors, so there's a reason longswords are the jacks of all trades. Their high base damage makes them preferable to maces or axes as main hand weapons in most cases. There's also just more sword options, which adds to the problem of the other one-handed weapons feeling a bit unloved. It's a shame too, because I enjoy the aesthetics of axes and maces more, but I have to deliberately choose a weaker option for the looks and vibes. It's not a problem if you're knowledgeable about the game or if you're playing on a lower difficulty, but it is something you have to work around. Moving on to maces. They deal moderate damage, are weak in crit chance, but have high armor penetration. Maces tend to be the weakest one-handed weapons due to high scores of armor penetration only mattering against elite or boss enemies. Regular Darkspawn, for example, only have a chainmail chest piece and boots equipped, and I'm not even sure the tier of their armor scales with their level, so they could have an armor score as low as 5 or 6 for the entire game. If you're dealing with more highly armored enemies like Darkspawn Alphas, Ogres, Revenants, Drakes, Dragons, and Bosses, then a mace could be useful. But because of this, maces end up feeling like a very situational weapon, not to mention the small amount of viable options. Idouken Mace is tier 2 and grants +2 damage versus Darkspawn and messy kills. The Dwarf Commoner receives this as a gift from Duncan at the end of the origin story. The damage versus Darkspawn is fairly useful for the super early game weapon because Ostagar is next, and you'll be fighting Darkspawn in the Korcari Wilds and in the Tower of Ishal. However, after this section, the mace falls off hard since its damage stays low and you're likely to go to areas with no Darkspawn presence. For its usefulness at Ostagar, I'll give it a 2 out of 5. Barbarian Mace is tier 3 and grants +1 strength. It should also have a rune slot, but doesn't in the base game. However, as with other weapons bugged in this way, Dane's Fixes adds the missing rune slot. You can obtain this in the Korcari Wilds as part of the Chastened Trail Signs side quest, or purchase it from Caesar in Denrim. The +1 strength isn't great unless it's allowing you to equip a higher tier armor piece, but even then, unless you're doing some kind of challenge run where strength upgrades are rare, like I am with the no level up challenge, +1 strength ultimately doesn't matter without other bonuses. 1 out of 5. Chevalier's Mace is tier 3 and grants +5% cold resistance, -5% spirit resistance, +2 cold damage, and has 1 rune slot. You can steal this from Colgrim during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest, loot it from the Redcliffe Castle Vault, or buy it from the Circle Tower Quartermaster. But it's not worth buying because the +2 cold damage is the only good thing about it, and even that is mediocre, since undead are resistant to it, and certain enemies like Revenant and Arcane Horrors are completely immune. 2 out of 5. Darkspawn Mace is the same like most other Darkspawn weapons, valuable to sell, but the same shitty +0.5 AP and -1 dexterity. 1 out of 5. Endrin's Mace is not normally obtainable in the game, even though it was supposed to be a reward from Harrowmount if you crown him King of Orzammar with high public support. However, if you have Quinn's Ultimate DAO fixback, this item is restored. It also has its stats changed to be a better quest reward, so I'll give it a score based on Quinn's version, since it's the only obtainable one anyway. It's tier 7 and grants +4 constitution, +10 mental resistance, +10 physical resistance, +10% dodge chance, +0.75 combat health regen, and +6 damage versus Darkspawn. I'll be honest with you, until I made this video I had no idea what the improved Endrin's Mace was like, because I haven't done a playthrough sighting with Harrowmount in longer than a decade before I had Quinn's fixback. This would be a great weapon for a tank due to the extra constitution, physical resistance, and dodge chance. The combat health regen doesn't do much unless you have other sources of it too, and of course the damage versus Darkspawn is always welcome since they are the main enemy. Mental resistance doesn't matter much. Endrin's Mace gets a 4 out of 5. Engraved Mace is tier 4 and grants +1 dexterity, +1 damage, +5 mental resistance, and has 1 rune slot. It's looted from Sir Landry as part of the side quest Honorbound. This is a decent early game pickup since Sir Landry isn't a hard fight, so you can go to Denerim quickly after Lothering and defeat him. The damage and dex bonus would be useful for a weapon and shield tank early on, though it will get outclassed quickly. 2 out of 5. High Constable's Mace is tier 6 and grants +1 combat stamina regen, +6 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain it from the Grey Warden Vault in Denerim. If you're just looking for damage versus Darkspawn, this is a great weapon for the Battle of Denerim. It only has 2 rune slots though, so you'll only be able to add 2 Silverite or Fire runes to it. Other weapons also have the advantage of giving you extra offensive stats, whereas this one only gives you a bit of stamina regen. And since you obtain it so late, you won't get to use it much. 3 out of 5. Liberator's Mace is tier 5 and grants +1 dexterity, +3% melee crit chance, and has 2 rune slots. It's sold by the Circle Quartermaster. The bonuses are so small that it's not a weapon worth your money. Technically better than a basic weapon, so 2 out of 5. Shaperit's Blessing is a bugged item that was supposed to be a reward for completing the Orzammar side quest, The Shaper's Life, for a rogue warden, but it wasn't properly implemented. Quinn's fixpack restores it, but unfortunately the mace is just a tier 6 weapon with +4 attack and 2 rune slots. It's extremely basic, just barely better than a basic item. 1 out of 5. The Reaper's Cudgel is tier 7 and grants +4 strength, +1 armor, +4 damage, +10% chance to knock back target, and has 3 rune slots. It's a DLC-related item that you can have in your inventory from the start of the game if you manage to defeat the Harvester on hard or nightmare difficulty in the Golems of Amgarok DLC. For your sanity, do it on hard. That DLC is extremely difficult. Obviously, as a DLC item that is linked to a genuinely difficult achievement, this is a very powerful item. I wouldn't call it overpowered, since there's better weapons out there, but it's on par with the top tier weapons in the game. The best aspect of this weapon is the high damage from both the +4 damage and +4 strength. The knockback chance could do more harm than good, since as a melee character you want enemies to be in your face so you can keep hitting them. For more defensively oriented weapon and shield tanks, I'd choose a different weapon that grants bonuses to dexterity and the like, but this is good for damagers. 5 out of 5. Finally, Vanguard is tier 6 and grants +3 strength, +3 constitution, and +1 combat stamina regen. You can obtain it by siding with Caridin and killing Bronca during the Dwarven main quest. This is a solid option for a tanky character. However, it obviously doesn't have high damage, and unless you purposefully go do a Paragon of her kind early, you won't get to use it for much. 4 out of 5. I hope you can see what I meant earlier when I said the other one-handed weapons feel unloved. There's only a few maces that are worth using, and the best one, the only one to get the max score, is related to a super hard DLC that most people struggle to complete even on normal difficulty. I don't think it's fair for maces to get shafted like this because they have cool visual designs and can be useful in fights against highly armored enemies. I just wish they had better stats to round them out. Instead, there's just a lot of low-tier maces in the game that are barely better than a basic item. Anyway, moving on to Waraxes. These do moderate damage with decent armor penetration and have better crit chance than a mace. While their base damage is slightly lower than a Longswords, they do have a higher attribute modifier, so that means that if your character's strength is high, you'll be able to squeeze out extra damage compared to Longswords. But since the crit chance is fairly low, I'd use them on characters who don't care about doing critical strikes much, and who have abilities that auto-crit when needed, so in particular that would be weapon and shield tanks, and dual-wielding warriors using the dual striking mode. AODH, pronounced A apparently, is tier 6 and grants +3% melee crit chance, +20% fire resistance, -5% cold resistance, +1 fire damage, and has 2 rune slots. It's obtained from Kristoff in a Denerim encounter after completing the Pearls Before Swine side quest. This is a very interesting weapon due to its fire damage. Elemental damage bonuses on weapons apply to all instances of that damage type, so that means that if you have 2 fire runes on this axe, you'll deal +1 fire damage on top of the regular weapon attack, then have +1 fire damage added to each fire rune's damage instance too. That would be a total of +3 fire damage, essentially, +4 if you have a mage casting the Flaming Weapons enchantment, which once again adds another instance of fire damage. While it may not seem like much, there are a lot of enemies weak to fire, Darkspawn and Undead being the main ones. You can also make them have even more of a weakness to fire, up to -100% resistance with spells like Vulnerability Hex and Affliction Hex. So because of the fire damage, this is a surprisingly powerful weapon if used in combination with high-tier fire runes, flaming weapons, and possibly hexes. 4 out of 5. Ash Warrior Axe is variable tier and grants +2 attack. Unfortunately, a very disappointing weapon, barely better than a basic one. The Ash Warriors are a cool faction of Berserkers, so it's a shame the weapon representing them is so bad and has nothing to do with berserking. 1 out of 5. Axameter is tier 6 and grants +2 damage, +10% crit damage, +4 damage versus dragons, has the Lucky property, and 2 rune slots. You obtain it from the Strange Wood encounter that you can get by traveling from Denerim towards the Brazilian outskirts, aka the Dalish camp. The Lucky property isn't implemented in the base game, but if you're using the tweak from Dane's fixes, it will add a tiny bit of crit chance, spell resistance, and dodge chance. +2 damage is nice, but the damage versus dragons is only useful in a handful of situations. The crit damage bonus is not necessarily useful since dual-wielding rogues are the ones who care most about crits, and this is not a good weapon for them. Though it's decent for a warrior in the early and mid-game. 3 out of 5. Axe of the Grey is tier 6 and grants plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 2 armor penetration, plus 6 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain it in the Grey Warden Vault in Denrim during the Landsmeet. I really like the Axe of the Grey for a dual-wielding warrior, and potentially for a Strength Dex hybrid rogue. The crit chance is nice, but the plus 6 damage versus Darkspawn is huge, so it's a great weapon for the Battle of Denrim. It's a shame you can't find this Grey Warden Vault earlier in the game, because these weapons would be really useful in the deep roads, but oh well. 4 out of 5. Biteback Axe is tier 6 but doesn't have any strength requirements, and it's rogue only. It grants plus 1.5 armor penetration, plus 15% crit or backstab damage, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain it by looting Arl Howe during the Rescue the Queen quest in the Landsmeet section of the game. While it doesn't have equip requirements so it can be used by any rogue, daggers are still the superior choice for rogues due to their attack speed. High tier daggers especially will have better offensive bonuses than this axe too. Plus, you obtain this very late. It would have been far more useful as an early game weapon. 2 out of 5. Bloodline is variable in tier and grants plus 3 dexterity, plus 10% spirit resistance, plus 1 armor penetration, plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 to 3 rune slots. You can obtain this in Ortan Taig from the Corrupted Spider Queen during the Dwarven main quest. While this is generally the last main quest you do before the Landsmeet, getting to Ortan Taig isn't that difficult, so you could get this axe slightly earlier in the mid-game and enjoy using it. If you value the 3rd rune slot, then you'd have to leave the deep roads for very last, since scaled tier 7 items appear generally from level 19 onwards. But Bloodline is perfectly fine even with just 2 rune slots, because its bonuses make up for it. The dex bonus is good for dual wielders and weapon and shielders, and of course the Darkspawn damage is a great bonus. The spirit resistance is good in the fight against the Archdemon, but not much else. Overall, a strong weapon that gets overshadowed by the top tier Longswords, especially since you get it so late. 4 out of 5. Darkspawn Waraxes is, as before, a weapon with good selling value but bad stats, plus 0.5 AP and minus 1 dexterity. 1 out of 5. Dagon's Dal Tanu is tier 4 and grants plus 10% nature resistance, plus 4 attack, and has 1 rune slot. You can obtain this by looting Dagon when you find him in the Brazilian forest. The attack bonus is marginally useful together with a rune slot, but you very likely already have better weapons by the time you reach the Brazilian forest, so the only reason to get this is to sell it. 2 out of 5. The Veshial is tier 7 and grants plus 2 strength, plus 5% melee crit chance, plus 1 combat stamina regen, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 2 nature damage, and has 3 rune slots. It's sold by Bodan in the party camp for a huge price of 131 gold and 55 silver, so it's very expensive. Is it worth it? Only if you want to use an axe. The plus 2 strength is great, since it will increase damage and attack, as well as potentially allow your character to equip higher tier armor. The melee crit chance bonus is significant enough, and since it also has crit or backstab damage, this works best for a damager or hybrid build that can take advantage of these stats. The stamina regen is good if you need it, but you will likely need a second source of regen to be able to sustain certain abilities that have stamina regen penalties. The nature damage is useless against many enemy types. Thankfully, you have 3 rune slots, so you can add actually useful elemental or other special runes. 5 out of 5 since this is the best axe. I feel bad for Waraxes. There's even less of them than maces, and there's no DLC item among them to shine. The Veshial is the only special item, but that's just a top tier base game item which is still not at the level of top DLC item power. I have a soft spot for axes because I enjoy the aesthetic of a barbarian-like character dual-wielding axes from my Diablo 2 days, so it's even more disappointing for me personally to have to score this paltry list. Moving on to daggers. They're weaker than other weapon types in terms of damage, but have high crit chance and AP, plus the highest attack speed out of all melee weapons. They do also have a lower attribute modifier, but their damage scales with both strength and dexterity in equal measure, so that does make it easier to get a good bonus to your damage from your attributes as a dual wielder or weapon and shield tank. As a rogue, you can get your strength bonus from cunning if you have the lethality passive, and yes, dagger wielding tanks are a thing. I personally don't like using daggers on them because they look goofy and unrealistic, but You know, to each their own. If you want to play a dagger and shield tank, go for it. Beastman's Dagger is tier 5 and grants plus 10% crit or backstab damage, and has 2 rune slots. It's found in a locked chest in the Templar quarters as part of Broken Circle. It's a decent early game upgrade, enhancing the damage of your crits and backstabs by a bit, and of course giving you rune slots. 2 out of 5. Crow Dagger is similar, but this one is variable in tier, granting plus 15% crit or backstab damage, and having anywhere from 0 to 3 rune slots depending on its tier. You can find Crow Daggers as random loot in a bunch of places, buy some from Caesar in Denrim or Alamar in Dusttown, loot it from the High Dragon on the mountaintop, Zevran starts with one equipped, and so on. Sometimes Crow Daggers can miss rune slots due to a bug, but if you have Dane's Fixes, it adds any missing rune slots. 3 out of 5, mainly for the potential for a 3rd rune slot at tier 7. Darkspawn Dagger is as always bad in terms of stats, plus 0.5 AP and minus 1 dexterity, but good in terms of sale value. 1 out of 5. Dead Taigshanker is tier 6 and grants plus 5 cunning, plus 0.5 AP, plus 6 attack. It interrupts spellcasting and has 2 rune slots. It's found in the Kadash Taig area during Shale's quest. This is a great weapon for rogues due to the cunning bonus. The AP bonus is so small it may as well not be there, especially since this already has high AP baseline. A solid bonus to attack, and the spellcasting interruption is quite good, though since you'll find this fairly late in the game after you complete the Dwarven main quest, by that point you should be able to easily disable and kill enemy spellcasters. Still a very solid option. 4 out of 5. Duncan's Dagger is tier 5 to 7 and grants plus 4 dexterity, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 10 damage versus dragons, and has 2 to 3 rune slots. It's obtained during the Return to Ostagar DLC, and while I love Duncan, his dagger is less than stellar. The damage versus dragons is only relevant in a few fights, and presupposes having this dagger before going to those areas. The dex and crit or backstab damage bonuses are great, but in total his dagger doesn't have enough to be top tier. 3 out of 5. Enchanted Dagger is tier 2 and grants plus 4 attack. You can obtain one by looting the Hurlock Alpha in the Korkari Wilds, and Liliana comes equipped with one. This is meant to be an early dagger that improves your chance to hit but doesn't do anything else. 2 out of 5. Fang is a dagger only available to City Elf Wardens if they didn't take the bribe from Vogan during the Origin. You obtain it from the Warden's father, Syrian, during the Unrest in the Alienage quest if you save him from the Slavers. The vanilla PC version sucks, so I won't be talking about that one. If you have Quinn's Fixback, the console version of the dagger is implemented, which is actually worth talking about. It's tier 7 and grants plus 3 cunning, plus 5% melee crit chance, plus 6 attack, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 1 nature damage, and has 3 rune slots. All the stats are great other than the nature damage, which is not relevant. However, since it's only available to City Elf Wardens under specific circumstances and is obtained so late, it gets a 4 out of 5. Gift of the Grey is the dagger that non-City Elf Wardens receive as a reward during the Unrest in the Alienage quest. It's tier 6, grants plus 5% melee crit chance, and has 2 rune slots. It's an absolute joke compared to Fang, and is on par with the Beastman's Dagger or the Crow Dagger. 3 out of 5. Olaf's Prized Cheese Knife is tier 5, grants plus 1 AP, and has 2 rune slots. It's obtained as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC from Honleith Village. It's a free dagger you can easily get early when you go recruit Shale, but quickly gets outclassed. 2 out of 5. The Edge is tier 6, grants plus 5 damage, plus 3% crit chance, plus 4 attack, and has 2 rune slots. It's a DLC item that you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game. This is my personal favorite dagger due to the huge plus 5 damage bonus. The other 2 stats are also useful, but the damage bonus makes it so that your dagger's damage is even better than the damage of a high-tier longsword, since the dagger also has superior armor penetration. I love to equip this as soon as possible if I'm doing a playthrough where I can use DLC items. 5 out of 5. The Rose's Thorn is tier 7 and grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 1 combat health regen, plus 3 damage, plus 5% melee crit chance, and plus 30% crit or backstab damage. You can buy it from Garen in the Orzammar Commons for 148 gold, 52 silver, and 50 copper, and it's worth every copper. This is a super powerful dagger for rogues, increasing both your crit chance and crit and backstab damage. It has dex and damage bonuses too, The health regen is a bit strange. Maybe the designer put that accidentally instead of stamina regen because it doesn't fit the rest of these stats. But it honestly doesn't matter because the other stats are just so good. I like to pair the edge with this as soon as I have the money to buy it and the dex to equip it. Absolutely top tier, 5 out of 5. Thorn of the Dead Gods is an interesting situation. There's actually 3 daggers with the same name of different tiers, so we'll talk about each of them separately. The tier 2 version grants +1 damage and +1 AP if you have Quinn's Fixback, otherwise it has its bonuses swapped with the tier 3 version. You can buy it from Barlin in the Lothering Tavern, and it's a decent early dagger for your rogues. It will obviously get outclassed soon by higher tier daggers with rune slots and better stats, but it's fairly cheap, so I do recommend picking it up. 2 out of 5. The tier 3 version grants +2 damage and +2 AP if you have Quinn's Fixback, otherwise it has its bonuses swapped with the tier 2 version. It also has 1 rune slot. You can steal this one from Anwar Dace either when finding him in the Idukan Taig or when he returns to Orzamar's Diamond Quarter. Unfortunately, unless you go super early to Orzammar to get this, by the time you tackle the Dwarven main quest, you'll probably have way better weapons. So this is just slightly better than the tier 2 version, getting a 3 out of 5. The tier 6 version grants +3 damage, +3 AP, and has 2 rune slots. It's obtainable as part of the Drifter's cash quest in the Deep Roads, so this one is obtained late too. It's decent due to its 2 rune slots and damage bonus, but it can't compete with the top tier daggers. You'll likely want to use this to upgrade a secondary character with something good, but not on your main dual wielder. 4 out of 5. Finally, Varathorn's Dar Masu is tier 4 and grants +2 AP, +6 attack, and has 1 rune slot. You can loot this from Varathorn if you side with the werewolves during the nature of the beast. It's a decent early to mid-game dagger, but you're far more likely to want to side with the elves for their ranged attacks during the Battle of Denerim, as well as Varathorn's merchant stock. But if you want to side with the werewolves for role-playing purposes, this is alright. 3 out of 5. Daggers get some of the same love that Longswords do. There's top tier ones, a bunch of really solid options, and even the ones that aren't amazing are generally good for the early or mid-game. It is important to have a good amount of daggers though, since you use them for dual-wielding rogues, as well as potentially both dual-wielding warriors and weapon and shield tanks. I just wish that maces and axes were given the same amount of attention, considering that they too could be used in a variety of situations if there were more options to choose from. Now I'll move on to shields, since this is the best place to put them right after the one-handed weapons they could be paired with. There are 4 types of shields in DAO, and I'll go through each category one by one. Bucklers are the smallest ones, offering tiny amounts of stats but having no fatigue penalty and low strength requirements. Technically speaking, they're supposed to be good for weapon and shield damagers, but there's only 4 offensive shield talents, so you don't need that much stamina to care about having very low fatigue. I've never found bucklers to be useful at all, other than in the case where you literally have no other shield available, like in an origin story. Caridin's shield is tier 6 and grants +10% cold, electricity, and spirit resistance. You can obtain it by looting it from Caridin during a Paragon of her kind if you side with Branka. Elemental resistances are not super useful other than in a handful of situations, and the most important one is fire by far. Spirit resistance is slightly useful in the fight against the Archdemon and a few other enemies, but it's not crucial. I'll give it a 3 out of 5 among bucklers though, since it at least reduces 3 types of elemental damage by a bit on top of its base stats. Gorham's shield is tier 1 and grants +0.25 combat health regen. You can purchase it from Gorham's initial stock in Denerim. It's so low in tier and thus barely has any stats. The health regen bonus is super tiny, so even if you have bonuses from other sources, this particular 0.25 doesn't matter at all. 1 out of 5. Methal's Blessing is tier 4 and grants +1% melee crit chance and +10% to healing effects received. You can loot it in the East Brazilian forest from a skeleton. +1% melee crit chance feels like a joke, and the healing bonus doesn't even work in the base game. If you have Dane's Fixes, you at least have the healing bonus implemented, and this could be a slight upgrade compared to a basic shield, but that's about it. 2 out of 5 if you have Dane's Fixes, otherwise 1. Ruck's shield is tier 3 and grants +10% spirit resistance and +4 attack. You obtain it by completing the Orzammar quest A Mother's Hope. The attack bonus increases your chance to hit, and the spirit resistance can be useful, but I still wouldn't use this shield over any of the larger shield types unless I was doing it as a challenge. 2 out of 5. Warden Recruit Shield is variable in tier and grants +2 damage versus Darkspawn. You're going to find a tier 1 version of this on the Genlock Alpha in the Tower of Ishal, but you could also find it in Grey Warden treasure containers. Unfortunately, the damage versus Darkspawn property on anything that isn't a weapon is completely useless based on my testing. You only get the bonus damage to Darkspawn applied to your attacks if you have the property on your weapons as a bonus or from Silverite runes. So the Warden Recruit Shield is not even the slightest bit better than a basic shield. 1 out of 5. Bucklers are extremely disappointing. I don't know what they were supposed to be, but the item designers missed the mark completely. Targes are light circular shields that have higher defensive bonuses than bucklers, but also apply a fatigue penalty. There are actually a few decent Targes here for both offensive and defensive shielders. Idukan Family Shield is tier 6 and grants +1 Cunning, +1 Constitution, +9 Defense, and +4 damage versus Darkspawn. A Dwarf Noble Warden can obtain this as a gift when speaking with Gorham for the first time in Denrim. Unfortunately, the damage versus Darkspawn property doesn't do anything when it isn't on a weapon, but thankfully this shield does have other stats. +9 Defense is a nice bonus for a tank focused on defense and dexterity. The +1 Cunning doesn't do anything useful other than a super tiny amount of AP, but the +1 Constitution does at least give you 5 extra HP and a bit of Phys Res. All in all, a solid shield you get for free if you're a Dwarf Noble, but you're likely to use it more for sentimental or lore reasons rather than power. 3 out of 5. Branka's Shield is tier 6 and grants +4 damage versus Darkspawn and +2 damage versus beasts. It's looted from Branka if you sided with Caradon at the end of the Dwarven main quest. Neither of the damage versus enemy type bonuses will apply, so this is the same as having a basic shield. 1 out of 5. Champion's Shield is tier 6 and grants a huge +12 defense. You can obtain it by stealing it from Vartog Gavorn in Orzammar. This is one of the best shields in the game, particularly useful for a tank focused on stacking defense and dexterity to be extremely hard to hit by physical attacks. For a Targe, not to mention a free one, this is amazing. 5 out of 5. Dead Coat of Arms is tier 6 and grants +1 Constitution and +1 Combat Stamina regen. It's dropped by the Revenant as part of the unmarked quest The Black Vials in one of the Denrim Back Alley encounters. The Stamina regen bonus is good for sustaining certain abilities or using active abilities more often. This would matter more for an offensive shielder, but could also be useful for a more classic defensive tank who uses the Taunt ability often. 3 out of 5. Finally, Shield of the Legion is the only tier 7 Targe that has bonuses, but the bonus in question is +10 mental resistance, so it might as well not be there. It's sold by Ruck in Ortantaig in the Deep Roads, but don't bother buying it. Mental Res is used to resist only a handful of enemy abilities, and so it's just not worth getting an item that only has Mental Res as a stat. 2 out of 5. Targes are way better than bucklers, there's just no contest. Most of the Targes are all quite decent, and they are tier 6 as well, which means great base stats, though there is a distinct lack of lower tier Targes with stats, which is weird. Anyway, moving on to Kite Shields. They have a pointy shape and offer higher defensive bonuses, but have higher fatigue as a trade-off. Usually tanks will prefer these due to the higher defensive base stats, but you can absolutely use them on damagers or damager tank hybrids without issue. Bulwark of the True King is tier 5 and grants +3 willpower, +2 constitution, +3 defense, and +1 armor. It's a DLC item you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game, and it's good but not overpowered. A solid option for a tank due to all these defensive stats. 3 out of 5. Kaelin's Shield is tier 5 to 7 based on your character's level and grants +1 armor and +20 missile deflection. It's a DLC item that you can obtain in the Return to Ostagar DLC. Its bonuses may not seem all that great, but this shield is part of the Kaelin's arm set together with Merrick's blade. I'll talk about the set later on, but I will note that the shield on its own is not super amazing. The missile deflection bonus is especially nice if you're going into a difficult encounter against a lot of archers, like the Sir Cothrian fight during the Rescue the Queen in Denrim, but otherwise you'll likely find other shields better if you're using the shield without its pair sword. For that reason, I'm giving Kaelin's Shield a 3 out of 5 on its own, and 5 if used with Merrick's blade. Eamon's Shield is tier 3 and grants +6 defense and +25 stamina. You can loot it from the Redcliffe Castle vault. This is quietly one of the best shields in the game, especially for the first half of the game due to a very solid defense bonus and the extra stamina equal to 5 points of willpower is always helpful to allow you to use more active abilities and or keep more abilities sustained. 4 out of 5. Havard's Aegis is tier 3 and grants plus 4% spell resistance and some extra missile deflection. I'm not sure how much exactly, but I'm assuming something like plus 5. You obtain this from the ogre on the top floor of the Tower of Ishal. It's a great shield when you get it, since it will replace either your shield or Alistair's. The 4% spell res isn't super useful unless you have other sources to get it to a decent percentage, but any extra missile deflection is good, especially early on when your stats are low. 2 out of 5. Loghain's shield is a Loghain-only tier 6 kite shield that grants plus 20 physical resistance. Loghain comes equipped with this if you recruit him. The shield is nothing special, but obviously Loghain has to have his own decent gear, both narrative-wise, as well as in case you didn't know Alistair would leave and you lost all the gear equipped on him. The Phys res isn't amazing, since weapon and shield characters can be immune to stuns and knockdowns if they use the shield wall sustained. But maybe you don't want to use shield wall due to its damage reduction, which is properly implemented with Dane's fixes, so in that case the Phys res is great. 3 out of 5. Redcliffe Elite Shield is tier 5 and grants plus 1 willpower, plus 3 defense, plus 15% electricity resistance, and plus 2 attack. You receive this as a reward from Arl Eamon after you cure him. Despite the fact that it's higher tier than Eamon's shield, it's just worse because it has a lower defense bonus, the 1 willpower means only plus 5 stamina, and the electricity res and plus 2 attack are not really useful. 3 out of 5. Shield of Hyever is tier 2 and grants plus 4 attack. You obtain this as part of the Human Noble Origin if you loot the treasury. Since it's obtained so early, it's not good past Lothering. If you want to use it for roleplay reasons, especially together with a family sword, know that it will be more difficult, and you'll either have to make up for this through gear or certain abilities or consumables, or else play on a lower difficulty. 2 out of 5. Swift Runner's Shield is tier 4 and grants plus 10% nature and spirit resistance. You can obtain it during the Elven main quest by curing the werewolves of their curse and asking them for a reward. Though frankly, this shield is not good. Nature resistance protects you against certain types of enemies with poisonous or venomous attacks. The spirit resistance is mostly good against the Archdemon and a few other enemies, but as I mentioned previously, these elemental resistances aren't very relevant most of the time. 2 out of 5. The Kite Shields have a lot of very solid options, with a few clear standouts like Kaelin's shield, especially when used as part of the set, and Eamon's shield. Heavy shields are squarish and have the highest defensive bonuses while also having the highest strength requirements and fatigue penalty. These are the best option in terms of defensive stats, so they're usually best for tanks. You don't have to necessarily use heavy shields for your tanks though, since there are some kite shields and even Targes like the champion shield that you may prefer. Duncan's shield is tier 6 and grants plus 3 willpower, plus 6 defense, and plus 1 combat stamina regen. It's looted from the secret Grey Warden vault in Denrim during the Landsmeet. It starts out as a gift item which you can give to Alistair, but afterwards it can be used by anyone in the party. This is a pretty decent shield if you need the stamina regen, but it also has a good defense bonus and plus 15 stamina from the willpower bonus on top of the stamina regen. You could use this as a possible upgrade to Eamon's shield, since the amount of stamina it gives you is almost the same, but it has better base stats and adds regen. 4 out of 5. Earthheart's Portable Bulwark is tier 5 and grants plus 1 to Strength, Dexterity, and Constitution. You can buy it from Bodan in the party camp. Compared to the large bonuses to stats like defense, missile deflection, stamina, and so on that you can get from other shields, this one isn't good enough. 2 out of 5. Fade Wall is tier 6 and grants plus 3 defense, plus 20% to healing effects received, plus 1 combat stamina regen, and plus 25 stamina. It has great stats, especially for an arcane warrior who loves the extra stamina and stamina regen that turn into mana and mana regen respectively. But if you've watched my arcane warrior guide, you'll know that I don't recommend this shield. This is for 2 reasons. 1, if you're playing the base unmodded game, Fade Wall is for some reason only a potential drop, and if you want to guarantee getting it, you have to save scum before killing Gaxkang and reload until the shield drops. The second reason is that I find the Unbound side quest fairly complicated to do, especially for people who aren't knowledgeable about the game. It involves speaking to a nervous adventurer in Orzammar and getting a bunch of other clues from around the world, and after that, you have to defeat Gaxkang, which is a very difficult fight since he's an elite boss-type enemy. I make it a point to not recommend items that are extremely difficult to obtain in my builds, since I want my guides to be accessible. So with that out of the way, yes, Fade Wall is great, but you'll likely obtain it late and have to go through a lot of effort to do so. With Quinn's Fix Pack, you can at least guarantee that the shield will drop, but even so, I don't find this item worth the effort or the hype. I would only use it on an Arcane Warrior, and that is if for some reason I didn't want to use the Kaelin's arm set on them. Due to this, Fadewall gets a 4 out of 5. Gregar's shield is tier 4 and grants plus 6 defense, plus 10% fire resistance, and plus 4% spell resistance. In the vanilla game, this is unobtainable, but Quinn's Fix Pack restores the ability for you to steal it from Knight Commander Gregoire in the Circle Tower. The defense isn't the highest since other shields have more, but the fire and spell resistance are pretty useful. Both will come in handy during the Mage main quest, since you'll fight mages and demons that cast spells and deal fire damage with spells like Flame Blast, or the abominations that explode after death. And there are other areas where this combo of spell and fire resistance works well. Overall, this shield is surprisingly more useful than it may seem at first glance. 4 out of 5. Hao's shield is tier 6 and grants plus 12 defense, plus 10% fire and cold resistance, and minus 2 willpower. You can obtain it in the Arl of Denerim's estate during the quest Rescue the Queen in a locked closet. This is another pretty great shield that I don't recommend in my builds because you get it so late in the game, during the Landsmeet portion, and after that you just have the final battle against the Darkspawn left, so you don't get much use out of it. The elemental resistances are also not as great anymore since other than some spells from a few Darkspawn emissaries, you won't have to deal with these elements. The defense is always great, so this shield can essentially be a potential upgrade over the Champion's Shield Targe, as long as you don't mind losing out on 10 stamina due to the willpower penalty. 4 out of 5. King Merrick's shield is tier 7, restricted to Loghain, and grants plus 4 armor and high morale. This is a very niche item, part of the Feast Day Gifts DLC pack, and mostly the equipable items you get out of the Gifts and Pranks DLC are just there for flavor, and not super amazing. However, I will say that this shield is very interesting because of the fact that you get a huge plus 4 armor bonus from it. If you're building a type of tank focused on armor instead of defense, then this shield is the only one that gives you such a huge bonus. Of course, it's restricted to Loghain, who you will only have available for the end of the game after the Landsmeet, with potentially a few DLC quests if you've left them for last. The high morale bonus does nothing in the base game, but Dane's Fixes implements high morale to grant plus 2 armor, plus 5 defense, and plus 3 strength. It's a powerful bonus which adds a lot to this item, bringing its total armor bonus up to plus 6. So if on the off chance you like using Loghain in the last part of the game and want to build him with very high armor, this is the perfect shield. But of course, it's a super limited item since it's restricted to only one character, so it gets a 3 out of 5. Warden Tower Shield is tier 6 and grants plus 3 willpower, plus 6 defense, and plus 1 combat stamina regen. It can be obtained in the Warden's Keep DLC by killing the demon-possessed corpse of Sophia Dryden. Similarly to Fadewall, this shield is also only a potential drop, not a guaranteed one. Regardless, this shield is a bit weird because in the base game the stats and description are the same as Duncan's shield. Only this one you can obtain earlier in the game since you can do the Warden's Keep DLC whenever you want to. Dane's Fixes can change the description of this shield so it doesn't look like it's the same as Duncan's shield. Either way, it's a solid shield that gets the same score of 4 out of 5 as Duncan's shield. Moving on to two-handed weapons, starting with Battleaxes. These deal moderate damage, have moderate armor penetration, and have the highest crit chance. But as a downside, they do also have the slowest attack speed of the two-handed melee weapons. And on top of that, most of them frankly suck. Axe of the Vashoth is tier 5 and grants plus 1 strength, plus 2 willpower, plus 1 damage, and has 2 rune slots. This is a perfectly decent weapon, and yet no one uses it. Why? Because it drops from a Hurlock General during the Battle of Denerim, literally the final part of the game. By that point, any two-handed weapon you're using is better than this, so there's no reason whatsoever to use Axe of the Vashoth instead. 1 out of 5 because you'll never use it unless you add it to your inventory with console commands. Darkspawn Battle Axe is variable in tier and grants plus 0.5 AP and minus 1 dexterity. As with all Darkspawn weapons, it sucks. 1 out of 5. Dragonbone Cleaver is tier 7 and grants plus 8 willpower, plus 5 damage, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, and has 3 rune slots. This is a DLC item that you have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you complete the Vartorl's Fall achievement during the Witch Hunt DLC. This is the only really powerful battle axe. The plus 5 damage is huge, and the bonus to willpower means you get a lot of stamina, plus 40. Not as much as you get from another two-handed weapon, but still great. Extra crit damage means you can use your auto crit abilities with greater effect, though of course your regular auto attack crits will also do this extra damage if you get lucky. 5 out of 5. Faith's Edge is tier 6 and grants plus 2 willpower, plus 5% crit or backstab damage, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain this by defeating Colgrim during the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. It's not great. The 5% bonus to your crit damage is barely there, and plus 2 willpower means 10 stamina. There's not enough stats for this to be a good weapon, and unless you do the Urn of Sacred Ashes as your first main quest, you're likely to have a better two-handed weapon when you get there. 2 out of 5. Griffin's Beak is tier 6, grants plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain this as a quest reward during the Elven main quest from Zathrian if you kill the werewolves and ask for a special reward from Zathrian beforehand. This weapon is restricted to Grey Wardens only, so only you, Alistair, and potentially Loghain can use it, which is a shame because both Alistair and Loghain are built as weapon and shield characters, and you can't change their build unless you have a respecialization mod, or in Alistair's case if you're fine with wasting his starting abilities. The damage versus Darkspawn is nice for all the encounters against Darkspawn, but there's nothing else. This weapon is also part of the Griffin's Ensemble set together with the Griffin's Helm, but the items on their own suck, as does the set bonus. 3 out of 5 due to the general usefulness of the damage versus Darkspawn, but barely. Finally, Meta Sheer Waraxe is tier 6 and grants plus 1 damage, plus 5% melee crit chance, and minus 1 dexterity. It's obtained by killing and looting the High Dragon on the mountaintop as part of the Urn of Sacred Ashes quest. The crit chance bonus is significant, so if you're trying to create a build that focuses on high crit chance for your auto attacks, I believe this is the best battle axe for that. 4 out of 5 since out of the battle axes, this is as good as it gets other than the DLC item. Overall, the battle axes are disappointing since only 2 of them are good, and the others are either bad or you won't get them until the very end of the game. Greatswords have high base damage, but have low crit chance and AP, just like the one-handed longswords. Their attack speed is the highest out of the two-handed weapons though, so that makes them better in most cases. Ageless is tier 6 and grants plus 0.25 combat stamina regen, plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn. It weakens nearby Darkspawn, has the Messy Kills property, and increases hostility and intimidation. It has either 0 or 2 rune slots due to a bug, but Dane's Fixes solves it and it has the 2 it's supposed to have. You can obtain this by killing the dragon in the secret quest Caged in Stone in the Orzammar Royal Palace. The Darkspawn weakening and hostility and intimidation properties aren't implemented in the base game, but Dane's Fixes adds the effects for them, which makes this weapon so much better. This is one of my favorite weapons in the game for encounters with Darkspawn due to the bonus damage against them and the weakening property, which reduces their attack and defense. 4 out of 5, amazing against Darkspawn but bad against anything else. Asala is tier 3 and restricted to Sten only, granting plus 1 willpower, plus 1.5 AP, plus 12 attack, and has 1 rune slot. It's obtained by completing Sten's personal quest. If you have Dane's Fixes, you can install an optional tweak that makes Asala tier 6 to make it more feasible to use it for the entire game, since Sten would 100% want to use his sword. The stats are decent, though it is lacking in damage, and the fact that it only has 1 rune slot puts it way behind higher tier weapons. That's why it's great if you have Dane's Fixes to increase the base stats and add a second rune slot, though you will have to first get Sten to have enough strength to equip it, which feels weird. Overall, a solid greatsword for Sten in the early and mid game, so 3 out of 5. Butterfly Sword is variable in tier and grants plus 1.5 AP, plus 12 attack, low morale, rainbow power, attracts butterflies, and has 0 to 3 rune slots. This is a DLC item from the Feast Day Pranks pack, which starts off as a prank gift you can give to Sten. Dane's Fixes implements the low morale stat to actually decrease a character's stats, granting penalties of -2 armor, -5 defense, and -2 damage. On the flip side, the high morale items give those stats as bonuses, but in the case of the Butterfly Sword, there is no reason whatsoever to use it if you have this fix. Otherwise, in the base game, it essentially has the same stats as Sten's sword, so you could use it as an upgrade at a higher tier so that it has more rune slots and higher base stats. The rainbow power and attracts butterflies properties are just visual, of course, and the sword isn't just restricted to Sten, so you could give it to someone else if you so desired, if you're not using that fix from Dane's Fixes. I'll give the Butterfly Sword a tentative 3 out of 5, with the caveat that with Dane's Fixes, it becomes an instant 1 because you don't want all those penalties. Chastened Flatblade is tier 2 and grants plus 1% melee crit chance and plus 1 AP. It's found in a chest in the Korcari Wilds, and it's a decent early game two-handed weapon since before that you don't have any two-handed weapons with bonuses. 1% crit chance is essentially nothing, but the extra AP is good, especially on Greatswords that have low base armor penetration. 2 out of 5, a nice upgrade early, but you'll replace it very soon. Darkspawn Greatsword is variable in tier and grants the usual plus 0.5 AP and minus 1 dexterity. Just like all the other Darkspawn weapons, it's decent to sell but shouldn't be used. 1 out of 5. Meteor Sword is tier 6 and grants plus 2 strength, plus 3 damage, minus 25% spirit resistance, and has 2 rune slots. You can buy it from Gorham's updated stock in Denrim after completing 3 main quests. This is a pretty nice sword, though the spirit vulnerability is somewhat bad for the Archdemon fight or any other fight against an elite or boss type enemy with spirit damage abilities. If you have sources of spirit resistance, then you could use this without issues. It's a solid two-handed weapon that isn't expensive, only 3 gold and 74 silver, so if you need a cheap but good two-hander, especially if you aren't using DLC items, this is a great choice. 4 out of 5. Shaperit's Blessing is tier 6 and grants plus 2.5 AP, plus 6 attack, and has 2 rune slots. It's supposed to be a quest reward in the unmarked side quest The Shaper's Life in Orzammar if your warden is a warrior, but in the vanilla game it's bugged and you don't get any reward. But if you have Quinn's Fix Pack, all the possible weapon rewards are implemented. It's not great, Sten's Asala is better in a way due to the higher bonus to attack, but it does have 2 rune slots as opposed to Asala's 1, and it's higher tier so it has higher base stats. So you could have this as a free potential upgrade for Sten. 3 out of 5. Starfang is tier 8 and grants plus 3 strength, plus 2.5 AP, plus 8 attack, and has 3 rune slots. You obtain this as part of the Warden's Keep DLC by giving Mikhail Dryden the meteor ore you get from a random encounter and asking him to craft you a greatsword out of it. You can only craft one version of Starfang, either the longsword or the greatsword, so it's up to you to decide which one you want. This is a powerful weapon since the extra strength increases your damage, and the bonuses to AP and attack are nice too. However, I wouldn't say that Starfang is the best two-handed weapon, and personally I prefer using other weapons. 4 out of 5. The Summer Sword is tier 6 and grants plus 20 physical resistance, a chance to knock back targets, and has 2 rune slots. It's looted from Sir Cothrian if you kill her either during the Rescue the Queen quest or right before the lands meet. It's not really a good sword. Physical resistance is all but useless on two-handed warriors because they have access to the Indomitable Sustained, which makes them immune to stun, knockdowns, and slip effects. The chance to knock a target back also doesn't make much sense for a warrior who wants to be up close and personal with their enemies. So I'm sorry to Sir Cothrian, but this gets a 2 out of 5. Finally, Eusaurus is tier 6 and grants plus 20% fire resistance, plus 10 damage versus dragons, and has 2 rune slots. It's found on Shah Weird during the side quest Watchguard of the Reaching in the Circle Tower. I hate those 2 quests in the tower that have you running around doing rituals, so I mostly skip doing them and thus don't get Eusaurus. It's a nice weapon, but it's just meant to be used against a few enemies. The High Dragon on the mountaintop, Flemeth if you decide to kill her in Morrigan's personal quest, and a couple of dragons and drakes. That's it. Otherwise, the damage versus dragons is entirely useless. The fire resistance is somewhat useful against spellcasters and demons too, but you can get fire res from other sources like pieces of armor, accessories, consumables, or the heroic defense spell if you really feel like you need it. 2 out of 5. Greatswords are kind of middle of the road when it comes to two-handed weapons, a bit of a departure from the many very good longswords. But there are still a lot more options for greatswords than Battleaxes and Mauls, so there was still a bias towards them when the designers created the items. There are a few powerful options, but they tend to be a bit more tame by having a penalty or lower bonuses, or else being situational. Moving on to Mauls. They have low base damage and the lowest crit chance, but have very high armor penetration as well as the highest attribute modifier to their damage. So their damage isn't really that low later when you have higher strength. Chastened Crusher is variable in tier and grants plus 3% melee crit chance while having a minus 5 penalty to attack. You can get a tier 1 version in the Korcari Wilds as part of the Chastened Trail Signs side quest, or purchase a potentially higher tier version from Farron in the Frostback Mountains. The 3% crit chance isn't worth the penalty to attack, especially in the early game. And once you've reached a later point in the game when you have a higher attack score, 3% crit chance isn't worth having no other bonuses on your weapon for. 1 out of 5, I'd rather use a basic weapon. Chastened Great Maul, on the other hand, is one of the best items in the entire game. It's tier 7 and grants plus 5 damage, plus 2.5 AP, plus 0.5 combat stamina regen, plus 75 stamina, and it has 3 rune slots. You can buy this from Gorham's updated stock in Denrim after completing 3 main quests, though it is also expensive, over 151 gold. The 5 extra damage is huge for a Maul that starts off with lower base damage but has much higher AP. This way, you're getting even better damage than an axe or greatsword, but with extra AP. Not to mention the additional AP you're getting from the bonus. Honestly, at some point it gets a bit excessive other than for bosses, but since you're getting this in the second half of the game, you'll have a decent amount of highly armored bosses to go through still, so it's fine. The extra stamina and stamina regen are very much appreciated for the purpose of keeping sustained abilities up and also using powerful two-handed abilities like Mighty Blow, Sunder Arms, or Sunder Armor. A well-deserved 5 out of 5. Darkspawn Maul, you know the drill. It has the same stats as all Darkspawn items, plus 0.5 AP, minus 1 dex. Sell it, don't use it. 1 out of 5. Exalted Maul is tier 6 and grants plus 2 willpower, plus 10 mental resistance, plus 4 damage versus undead, and has 2 rune slots. You obtain this during the side quest The Tears of Andraste in Denrim as part of the Crime Wave questline, but this only appears during the Landsmeet. That's very late. The 2 willpower just means plus 10 stamina, the mental res is pretty much useless, and the damage versus undead would have been useful if you could get it earlier to use it in Redcliffe or other areas with undead enemies. As it stands, considering the time you get it, the only place it would be somewhat useful for would be the Warden's Keep DLC, if of course you kept that DLC for so late in the game. 2 out of 5. It's just positioned too awkwardly in the late game to be of use. Forge Master's Hammer is tier 5 and grants plus 25% fire resistance, plus 6 attack, and has 2 rune slots. You loot this from the Genlock Forge Master in the Dead Trenches as part of the Dwarven main quest. It's not a bad Maul, but the issue is that most of the time you'll likely go into Deep Roads late, and by that time a tier 5 weapon isn't all that, especially since it just increases your attack and fire res a bit. 3 out of 5, but unless you get it early, it's not worth using. Heavy Maul is tier 3, grants plus 2 damage, and has 1 rune slot. You can possibly obtain this as loot from a bunch of places, in Redcliffe Castle, in Marjolaine's home during Liliana's personal quest, the How Knight in the Human Noble Origin, and a couple of other places. But as far as I know, it's a random drop out of a list, so you may not come across it. It's a decent two-handed weapon early when you don't have a lot of strength to equip higher tier stuff, since it increases your damage and essentially has the same base damage as a basic tier 5 Maul. 2 out of 5. Nug Crusher is one of my favorites. It's tier 5 to 7, grants plus 4 dexterity, a huge plus 100 stamina, has a chance to stun enemies on hit, and has 2 to 3 rune slots. You can loot it as part of the Return to Ostagar DLC. I like using this if I want my two-handed warrior to use a lot of activated talents, because that is a huge amount of bonus stamina, equal to 20 points of willpower. The chance to stun is particularly good if you have a mage in the party who can cast haste to increase your warrior's attack speed, since that will mean more of a possibility to stun enemies. A wonderful choice for a two-handed warrior, and you also get it for free. 5 out of 5. Spiked Maul is tier 5 and grants plus 3 damage, plus 2% melee crit chance, minus 1 dexterity, and has 2 rune slots. You loot it from Jarvia's chamber in the Carta hideout as part of the first half of the Dwarven main quest. It's actually not that hard to deal with the Carta fairly early on in your playthrough, so you can obtain this Maul in time for it to see more use. The extra damage is of course great and brings its base damage above a tier 7 weapon, while also giving you a bit of extra crit chance. It's a shame it doesn't offer any other bonuses. It can't compete with the top tier Mauls, but it's a free pickup and definitely worth using. 4 out of 5. Thorvald's Luck is tier 6 and grants plus 10% to healing effects received, plus 4 attack, plus 10 physical resistance, and has 2 rune slots. You can buy it from Gorham's updated stock in Denrim after completing 3 main quests. Unfortunately, it's not worth buying. The healing effects bonus doesn't do anything in the vanilla game, though with Dane's fixes, it's properly implemented. Plus 4 attack isn't that important by that point in the game, unless you have a character with a very poor attack score for some reason. And the physical res is useless for a two-handed warrior due to the Indomitable talent, making them immune to stuns, knockdowns, and slip effects, which are the main things that ask for a physical resistance check. 2 out of 5. Trian's Maul is tier 6, and in the vanilla game it's quite bad because it only has a plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn bonus and 2 rune slots. You can obtain it as a reward for making Balin king during the Dwarven main quest if he has low support. For these stats, I'd give it a score of 2. Damage versus Darkspawn is great, but it literally has nothing else. However, if you have Quinn's Fixback, that mod makes this Maul actually worth something since it's a reward for such a high level quest. The new Treant's Maul is tier 6 and grants plus 2 strength, plus 2% melee crit chance, plus 15% crit or backstab damage, plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 rune slots. That's way better and means you may actually care to use it in the final quests of the game, especially in the Battle of Denerim against the Darkspawn Horde. The strength increases your damage and attack score, crit chance and crit damage are always welcome on a two-handed character. A very solid piece, though it doesn't quite compare to the top two. 4 out of 5. I feel like Mauls get at least a few more interesting options at different tiers, so there's a good spread of them from tier 5 to tier 7. I find that these are fairly well balanced, though I would have liked to see a few more early game options at tier 3 or 4. In any case, these have been all the melee weapons and shields ranked. Before we move on to ranged weapons, I'll score the grand total of 2 item sets that contain weapons. Kaelin's Arms is comprised of Merrick's Blade and Kaelin's Shield, which are DLC items you can obtain during the Return to Ostagar DLC. Merrick's Blade is amazing on its own, Kaelin's Shield less so, but together they are monstrously powerful. The set bonus grants plus 5 damage and a huge plus 5 combat stamina regen. Even just the plus 5 damage would already catapult the score to 5, but the stamina regen puts it over the top since it allows certain powerful sustained abilities to be used together without draining your stamina. In particular, the one sustained ability that's super powerful is the Arcane Warrior's Shimmering Shield, which grants plus 15 armor, plus 75% to all elemental resistances, and plus 75 to both physical and mental resistance. It has a mana regen penalty of minus 10, so the only way you can completely offset it, on PC at least, is by using Kaelin's Arms for a total of 5.75 regen, Andrew's Blessing for plus 2, any of Wade's Superior Dragon Armor sets for plus 2, and finally the second tier of the Combat Training skill for plus 0.5. This sustain spell makes your mage almost unkillable, so for enabling this to be used indefinitely, Kaelin's Arms gets a 5++ out of 5. I don't even know how to score this, it's just insanely powerful like nothing else in the game. The second set is Griffin's Ensemble, comprised of the Griffin's Beak Battleaxe and Griffin's Helm. Both of these items kind of suck on their own, and the set bonus is Flank Immunity, which makes enemies not receive bonuses when attacking your character from behind or from a side. Not sure if it completely blocks backstabs, but even if it does, it's not really worth the price of using those 2 incredibly subpar items. They are Grey Warden items, so if you wanted to do a kind of challenge where you use Grey Warden gear, this would be fine, but otherwise you just won't care about the set bonus at all. 2 out of 5 since it's technically not useless, but in practice you likely won't use it. With that disappointment, we reach the end of the item sets. It's such a shame the BioWare designers didn't make more lore-based sets, like maybe combining the Thorn of the Dead God's daggers, Duncan's sword plus his dagger, or the shield you can find in the Grey Warden Vault. Could have combined a magic staff or robes with an accessory, and so on. I'm a huge fan of set items in games like Diablo 2 or Diablo 3, for example. Even if not all the sets are good, I like that they exist because they add something special to the game, suggesting certain things about characters and factions in the lore. I like the sets in Origins and wanted more of them. There were a few item sets in DA2 as well, but it was mostly just armor sets plus 1 accessory set from the Mark of the Assassin DLC. I was very sad when they did away with them entirely in Inquisition, though I guess they removed the different armor pieces and just had armor plus helmet, so armor sets were kind of out of the question. Anyway, we'll move on to ranged weaponry, starting with shortbows. As a note, ranged weapons don't have rune slots, so in many ways they trade off that extra range and possible safety for generally less damage. Shortbows are ranged weapons that use arrows for ammunition. You only care about the ammo for the special types that add extra damage or bonuses to your hits. You don't actually need to source basic arrows for your bows. Among all the bows, shortbows have the fastest attack speed but the lowest damage and range. Their damage scales equally with strength and dexterity, though various archery talents have to do with dex, so it's better to mainly put points into dex for archers. Since shortbows have a faster attack speed, it's okay if they don't have the rapid aim property, though it's still good to have that on another piece of gear to reduce the aim time of your talents. Bregan's bow is tier 5 and grants plus 3 AP, plus 6 attack, and plus 10% crit or backstab damage. This is a DLC item that you should have in your inventory from the start. It's not the best bow ever, but among shortbows it's very good. The bonus to attack is nice, making you hit more consistently. The AP is alright, especially since shortbows don't really have high AP. The crit or backstab damage bonus is only good once you have a decently high crit chance or once you've unlocked the auto-crit abilities Critical Shot and Arrow of Slaying. 4 out of 5. Darkspawn Shortbow is just like all the other Darkspawn weapons, same shitty bonuses, same decently high sell value. 1 out of 5. Scout's Bow is variable in tier and only has a tiny rapid aim property of -0.1 seconds. You can find it in Elven treasure containers generally in the Brazilian forest, or buy it from Varathorn in the Dalish camp. A Dalish elf warden can also persuade Master Island to give them one for free during the origin or buy one from him. The rapid aim bonus on this is so small that you can't notice it, but technically it's better than a basic shortbow, so 2 out of 5. The Dark Moon is tier 7 and grants +2 willpower, +10% nature resistance, and +1.5 AP. You can buy it from Varathorn's updated stock in the Dalish camp after completing 3 main quests. But there's no real reason to buy this bow. The willpower bonus means +10 stamina. Elemental resistances don't really matter for archers, since you should have a tank keeping enemies off them. The AP is nice, but that's about the only good thing about this bow. 3 out of 5 due to the AP bonus. The Fox's Bow is tier 6 and grants +10 missile deflection. You can loot it in the Redcliffe Castle Vault. Defensive stats on your archer shouldn't be necessary usually, unless you're doing a solo playthrough, and you'll already have high defense and missile deflection due to investing a lot into dexterity. Technically better than a basic item, but not really since it isn't increasing your offensive capabilities, so 1 out of 5. Whitewood Bow is the only short bow I usually use. It's tier 4 and grants +3 damage and +5% ranged crit chance. You can find it in a chest in the Kadan Fey hideout as part of the Trial of Crows questline. While it's lower tier than Bregan's Bow, it has bonus damage to put it on par with the base damage of a tier 6 longbow. The crit chance is the real reason to use this though, since 5% is very good. If you prefer the extra AP from Bregan's Bow instead, that's perfectly fine, but I think crit chance is better for archers, so this is a 5 out of 5 for me. Wild's Bow is tier 3 and grants +10% nature resistance. You can loot it from the Chasen Cache as part of the Chasen Trail Signs side quest in the Korkari Wilds. It's an early game bow, but it's just the same thing as using a basic tier 3 bow. There's just no reason to use this, so 1 out of 5. It's really sad that these are the only short bows. There's only 2 worth using, and one of them is a DLC item. In comparison, even the melee weapons that aren't well loved get a lot more usable options. Moving on to longbows, things are better here. Longbows have higher base damage than shortbows, but have a longer aim time. They also use arrows as ammunition, so you can pair them up with special arrows that deal extra damage or have certain effects. Their damage also scales with strength and dexterity equally, though once again due to various archery-related things, like your ranged attack score and various talents scaling with dex, it's better to just focus mostly on dex. Antivan Longbow is variable in tier and grants +1% ranged crit chance. You can buy it from Caesar and Denrim. Zevran has one in his secondary slot. The Assassin Leader during Liliana's personal quest drops it, and the High Dragon on the mountaintop also drops one. But there's no point in using this bow unless you're getting it for free and upgrading from a basic one. 1% crit chance isn't noticeable, and there aren't any other bonuses. 1 out of 5. Bow of the Golden Sun is tier 6 and grants +4 attack. You can loot it from Devera in the Tevinter warehouse as part of the Alienage quest during the Landsmeet. At least it makes you hit slightly more consistently, though if you have high dex you shouldn't have any issues hitting enemies, and on top of it all, you're getting this so late in the game that it basically has no use. Still a 2 out of 5 since it is noticeably better than a basic bow. Dalish Longbow is variable in tier and grants a tiny -0.1 second rapid aim property. You can find it as loot in Elven treasure containers or buy it from Varathorn in the Dalish camp and Farron in the Frostback Mountains. You could also buy one from Island during the Dalish Elf origin. Longbows have a slower attack speed, and for them you really do need a more powerful rapid aim bonus, so unfortunately the Dalish Longbow isn't good enough. I guess some rapid aim is better than none, so 2 out of 5. Darkspawn Longbow is variable in tier and grants +1 damage but -1 dexterity. Interestingly enough, this one is different from the other Darkspawn weapons. I was curious if the damage bonus is significant enough to merit losing out on 1 point of dex, and if you're only interested in damage, then surprisingly yes. 1 point of dex gives you around 0.3 points of damage as part of the Longbow's attribute-based damage calculation, so with a +1 damage you're getting a grand total of +0.7 extra damage per hit. This is totally the kind of calculation that everyone wanted to know when they clicked on this video, right? But hey, the Darkspawn Longbow is the only Darkspawn weapon that gets a score of 2 out of 5, since it is actually better than a basic item in terms of damage. Falon Din's Reach is tier 7 and grants +2 damage and rapid aim, this time the proper -0.3 second version. You can loot this from the treasure hoard of the dragon in the Upper Brazilian ruins. This is one of my favorite bows because of how simple it is. Rapid aim, check. Damage bonus, check. You also get it for free as you go through Nature of the Beast quest, which you can do fairly early, so it's just super solid. 5 out of 5. Far Song is tier 7 and grants +2 damage, rapid aim, +3% ranged crit chance, +10 attack, and +10% crit or backstab damage. But Nate, I hear you ask, how come you gave Falon Din's Reach a 5 if Far Song has the same bonuses and more? Well, Far Song is a longbow you can only obtain if you let Owen die during the Red Cliff questline, either by abandoning the village or not rescuing his daughter so that he offs himself. You need to do that because a new blacksmith comes in if Owen dies, and that blacksmith has Far Song in his stock. What it comes down to is the fact that I play my RPGs by making the choices my character would make, and most of the time my characters save the village and also save Velena since she's on the way as they're clearing out the castle of undead. Far Song is also super expensive, coming in at almost 121 gold, so it's one of those premium items you have to save up for and make a choice because unless you're using dirty, nasty exploits, you can only buy a few of these super expensive items in the entire game. Yes, it's an amazing bow, but since I don't use it in pretty much any of my playthroughs, other bows that have less stats can still be a 5 out of 5. But of course, Far Song does get a 5 out of 5. Mage's Eye is tier 7 and grants +3% ranged crit chance and +4 attack. You can loot this from the locked chest in the Haven Village store. The shopkeeper won't mind if you take it. This is a solid bow, increasing your chance to hit and your chance to crit. Not amazing, but serviceable. 3 out of 5. Marjolaine's Recurve is tier 7, Liliana restricted, and grants +3 cunning, +3 damage, and has the rapid aim property. You can loot this in Marjolaine's home as part of Liliana's personal quest. This is an amazing bow, and I always give it to Liliana if I use her as an archer. Not only is it poetic justice for her to use her rotten ex-mentor's bow to do good, but it's also a powerful bow that deals a lot of damage baseline due to the damage and cunning bonuses. The cunning can contribute to your bow's damage if you get the lethality passive and have a higher cunning than strength score. It will add to the bow's attribute-based damage and also give you a bit of extra armor penetration. I do wish this bow was usable by other characters too, but I understand why Liliana would want to keep it for herself. 5 out of 5, even if it's restricted to one character. Spear Thrower is tier 6 and grants +2.5 AP and has rapid aim. You can loot it from the Genlock Forge Master in the Dead Trenches and the Deep Roads. It's usable due to having rapid aim, but the AP bonus isn't all that. You already have a solid base AP for Longbows and can have extra from your cunning score. I wouldn't use this over Falon Din's Reach or Marjolaine's Recurve, but it's alright, so I'll give it a 3 out of 5. The Sorrows of Arlathan is tier 7 and grants +3 damage, +6% ranged crit chance, +3 AP, and has a big rapid aim bonus of -1 second. This is a DLC item you'll have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you complete the Through the Looking Glass achievement in the Witch Hunt DLC, which you'll do just by progressing through Witch Hunt. This is, of course, an extremely overpowered bow, which tends to be the case with most DLC items. If I'm doing a playthrough that allows DLC items, this is my favorite longbow, and I do consider it to be the best bow in the entire game. 5 out of 5. Wolf Killer is tier 4 and grants +4 damage versus undead and +8 damage versus beasts. You can obtain it during the rare Ironbark quest by asking Varathorn to craft you a bow. I'll be honest, this bow is essentially useless since it doesn't have rapid aim or any generally good bonuses. But if you wanted to, I guess you could use it in certain areas that have beasts and or undead, like in the Brazilian forest and ruins, but do be sure to have other rapid aim gear, use the rapid shot sustained or the haste spell, because otherwise your attacks will be too slow. Moving on to crossbows, which are the final non-magical ranged weapon. Crossbows are really weird and they tend to suck, so pretty much no one uses them, but nonetheless, I'll try to highlight some good aspects. They use bolts for ammunition, which are different from arrows but function similarly in that you can find special bolts with extra damage or effects. In particular, the sure shot bolts deal 10 to 20 extra damage versus Darkspawn, though you can only get 20 from Farron in the Frostback Mountains and another 20 from Bodan in the Redcliffe Castle before the final battle. Crossbows have the longest range and highest base damage and AP, but they have a very slow attack speed. Even weirder, they require strength to equip instead of dexterity, and their damage does not scale with any attribute since higher strength or dex wouldn't make the bolt fire any harder from the crossbow. Crossbows tend to be alright to use at lower levels, but their damage falls off later on. The only way you can increase crossbow damage is by using a higher tier crossbow, using special bolts that deal extra damage, or having various bonuses to aim speed, damage, critical chance, or critical damage, either from gear, talents, or spells. Darkspawn crossbow is variable in tier and brings us back to the tried and true form of plus 0.5 AP and minus 1 dexterity. Since you don't really get any damage bonuses from dex for crossbows, you could use this for the extra AP, though of course you are also losing attack and defense due to the dex penalty. Overall, it's not as good as the Darkspawn longbow, so it still gets a 1 out of 5. Nugbane is tier 4 and grants plus 3 damage. In the vanilla game, it's unobtainable, but if you have Quinn's Fixback, it's properly implemented to be stolen from the Mines Commander in Orzammar. Its damage is very high, even higher than a base tier 7 crossbow, so this would be a great weapon to go steal in Orzammar real quick. It has a low 18 strength requirement, so you can easily equip it on your archer, and as long as you have rapid aim, the rapid shot sustained or haste, you should be able to deal quite a significant amount of damage to enemies at lower levels. 5 out of 5. Antique Warden crossbow is tier 3 to 7 and grants plus 1 damage and has the rapid aim property, a special minus 0.5 seconds instead of the usual minus 0.3. At a low tier, this isn't as good as Nugbane, although it does have a good rapid aim bonus. At tier 7, this would do more damage than Nugbane and also have the reduced aim time, but the problem is that by the point items drop at tier 7, you will likely not want to use crossbows anymore. So I'll have to give the Antique Warden crossbow a 4 out of 5. Dwarven Defender is tier 6 and grants plus 3 dexterity and plus 6 damage versus Darkspawn. This is another unobtainable item in the vanilla game, but if you have Quinn's Fixback, then it's implemented to be dropped by Rojek in Orzammar's Dusttown if you choose to kill him instead of doing his lyrium smuggling quest. This is a very interesting crossbow because in combination with the short shot bolts that deal massive damage versus Darkspawn, this is the highest damage ranged weapon against them. Combined further with Scattershot to conserve the limited ammo, you can obliterate entire groups of Darkspawn with one short shot bolt. So this is actually an amazing weapon to use in a few combat encounters against very large groups of Darkspawn. At tier 6, it just needs 26 strength to equip, so it's not terrible to put a few extra points in strength to use it. Due to being so powerful against Darkspawn, I have to give it a 5 out of 5. Precision Geared Recurve is tier 6 and grants plus 1.5 AP and plus 4 attack. You can buy it from Garen in the Orzammar Commons, or get it as a quest reward during the Trial of Crows questline. This crossbow unfortunately isn't as good as the other ones, since it doesn't have bonuses to damage or rapid aim. 2 out of 5. Sailor's Crossbow is tier 6 and has the rapid aim property, the regular version that reduces aim speed by 0.3 seconds. You can buy it from Barlin in the Lothering Tavern for pretty cheap, and it's a very solid early crossbow you can use until you get access to Nugbane or the Antique Warden crossbow. 3 out of 5. Imperium Crossbow is tier 7 and grants increased damage versus demons on the PC version of the game. On console, it's way more useful with a bonus of plus 2 damage and minus 1 dexterity, but unfortunately the PC version is what I'm scoring here. You can steal it from the Unscrupulous Merchant in Lothering. I'm not entirely sure how the damage versus demon works, because it doesn't state a specific number and it doesn't say massive damage either, which would have been in the 10 to 20 damage range. So considering the fact that I don't even know if this has any effect at all, I'll give it a score of 2 out of pity, just in case you do get some bonus damage against demons. If you don't, then it's a 1. Either way, I recommend using the other better crossbows on this list. As you can see, crossbows can be quite powerful in the early game, but you will feel the lack of attribute damage scaling from the mid-game onwards. Even if you increase your armor penetration through cunning and get as much extra damage through talents, spells, and special bolts, I'm not sure that using only crossbows is going to be a great experience, especially on higher difficulties. Is it possible? Yes, but I'd personally recommend using crossbows in the early game, then switching to some of the powerful longbows, and only using Dwarven Defender, ideally with short-shot bolts and scattershot in difficult Darkspawn fights. We're in the home stretch now, just mage staves left. Staves are two-handed ranged weapons that mages use to shoot magical projectiles that can't miss, unless blocked by the environment. The staff basic attack costs no mana, but has very low damage and can't crit. Thankfully, staves do have a ridiculously high armor penetration score to ensure that at the very least they can do those few points of damage. Unlike with crossbows, you can increase staff basic attack damage through increasing your mage's spell power. If you have the Staff Focus passive, the amount of bonus damage you get from spell power is increased by about 33%. Just like the other ranged weapons, staves can't be enchanted with runes. One important thing to know about staves is that their damage is not the same, because each staff has a particular elemental type of damage it deals with its basic attacks. Some deal physical damage, in which case that's the same as regular weapon damage, but the others have fire, cold, electricity, or nature damage. Out of all types, nature damage is the worst because many enemies are resistant or even immune to it. Everything else is generally useful, though with fire there are some enemies like rage demons who are immune to fire, but it's more than worth using it since Darkspawn and Undead are weak to fire. Any buff to your elemental damage or any penalty to the enemy's elemental resistance does apply to your staff's basic attacks if you're attacking with an actual element. Elemental damage bonuses cap at plus 30%, which is fairly easy to get to with some mage gloves and bonuses from either your staff or another source. And another way you can add to your staff damage is through ally abilities like Shale's Stone Aura, which adds plus 3 to the staff's base damage, and an Assassin's Mark of Death, which increases all damage dealt to a target by 20%. With that explanation out of the way, let's get into the actual staves. Other than Valor's Staff, which is a temporary weapon you get during the Mage Origin in the Fate section, every single staff has bonus stats, so that's fun. No real basic items here, though some of the staves can be considered as such since their bonuses are tiny. Acolyte's Staff is one of these basic staves. It's tier 1, deals physical damage and grants plus 2 spell power. This is slightly better than the magic staff that a mage warden received during their origin, even though it has a lower monetary value. You can find it as loot in the Circle Tower either during the mage origin or during Broken Circle. Buy one from the Quartermaster at Ostagar or get one from the mage's chest in Ostagar as part of the Hungry Deserter side quest. I wouldn't recommend buying it since it barely gives you anything. As a baseline item, it gets a 1 out of 5. Blackened Heartwood Staff is tier 1, deals nature damage, and grants plus 2 damage and plus 2 spell power. You can find it as part of the Mage Origin in the basement. Early on, this is a great staff to use against enemies that aren't resistant to nature, such as bandits, various humans, elves, or dwarves, wolves, bears, that kind of thing. 2 out of 5 since it can be decent early, like in Lothering, until you get something better. Corrupted Magister's Staff is tier 5, deals physical damage, and grants plus 5 spell power, plus 15% spirit damage, and has a 5% chance to paralyze enemies with its attacks. You can obtain it as part of the Return to Ostagar DLC. It's a pretty nice staff if you want to use spirit damage spells, though there's not a huge amount of them. The 5% chance to paralyze is quite small, and your attack speed isn't great. But in case you get lucky, the paralyzation effect is very powerful. Spell power is always great, since it increases the damage and effectiveness of your spells, plus your staff's damage. All in all, a solid staff, but surprisingly not overpowered despite being a DLC item. 3 out of 5. Darkspawn Staff varies between tier 1 and 2, deals nature damage, and grants plus 1 spell power and plus 5% spirit damage. You can obtain it as random loot from Darkspawn Emissaries or Darkspawn Treasure, and it's a guaranteed drop from the Hurlock Emissary in the Korcari Wilds. The nature damage attacks are a problem against most enemies. If it had higher spell power, then maybe it would have been worth using in some situations. 1 out of 5, but decidedly worse than the Acolyte Staff. Enchanter's Staff is tier 1 to 7, deals cold damage and grants plus 1 magic, plus 10% spirit resistance, and plus 5% cold, electricity, and fire damage. You can buy it from the Quartermaster's other goods in Ostagar, the Unscrupulous Merchant in Lothering, or Caesar in Denrim, and Wynn starts out with one. It's also sometimes found in Magi treasure containers. It's a perfectly fine staff, and the cold basic attacks are decent. 3 out of 5. Final Reason is tier 6, deals physical damage, and grants plus 3 damage, plus 10 spell power, and plus 15% fire damage. It's a collector's edition item, but if you use a mod, you can get it for yourself. I personally own a collector's edition version of the game, but I have no idea how to add the item to my game anyway since I use the GOG version rather than the physical disc, so I use the mod that adds the collector's edition items anyway. This is a great staff dealing a lot of damage, the spell power bonus is huge, and the extra fire damage is always great since you can fry Darkspawn and Undead with it. 5 out of 5. Harrowmont's staff is extremely shitty in the vanilla game, being tier 3, dealing electricity damage and granting plus 1 magic and plus 2 constitution. It's supposed to be a quest reward for crowning Harrowmont as king in Orzammar, albeit with low support. But it's an absolute joke. If you have Quinn's Fixback though, the staff is upgraded to tier 6 and grants plus 1 magic, plus 2 constitution, plus 2 willpower, and plus 0.5 combat mana regen. The vanilla version of the staff gets a 1 out of 5, but Quinn's version is far more usable and gets a 2 out of 5. Heaven's Wrath is tier 6, deals electricity damage, and grants +1 combat mana regen, +5 spell power, and +10% electricity damage. It's pretty nice for an electricity-based staff, but unfortunately you get it very late, buying it from Bodon at Redcliffe Castle before the final battle. Due to this, it sees very little use, so it gets a 2 out of 5. Lightning Rod is tier 2, deals electricity damage, and grants +10% electricity resistance and +10% electricity damage. You can buy it from Barlin in the Lothering Tavern or from the Wonders of Thedas in Denerim. It's a pretty shitty staff because it doesn't have generally applicable bonuses. There's only 4 spells dealing electricity damage in the game, so it's not great even if you unlock them all and use this in the early game. The staff is low tier, so it has low base damage too. If I was for some reason focusing on the lightning spell tree, then maybe I'd use this, but that's about it. 2 out of 5. Magic Staff is variable between tier 1 and 3, deals physical damage, and grants +1 magic. This is the most basic staff out there, and it's even worse than the Acolyte staff. You get it during the Mage Origin, Morrigan has it as a starting weapon, and you can get a bunch of these if you buy them from various merchants, or get them as random loot. There's no reason to use this unless you literally have no staff at all, so it gets a 1 out of 5. Magister's Staff is tier 6, deals fire damage and grants +1 combat mana regen, +5 spell power, and +10% spirit damage. You can obtain this by killing Zathrian either if you side with the werewolves, or decide to kill him after slaying Witherfang. This is a fairly interesting staff that has a good spell power bonus, increases your spirit damage, so you can use it for a spirit damage spell build, and you also get some mana regen with it, which is nice for the purposes of sustaining spells like haste. Plus, its base damage is fire, so that's nice against many enemies. It's locked behind a major role-playing choice and a main quest though, so you're likely to not be able to get it, as I'm sure most people either convince Zathrian to lift the curse or else side with the elves. Regardless, it's very solid, so it gets a 3 out of 5. Malign Staff is tier 4, deals physical damage, and grants +1 combat mana regen, +5 spell power, -1 willpower, and has a +10% bonus to spirit and electricity damage. This is a really nice staff that would have been great to find sometime in the early game. However, you loot this from the Herlock General in the Denerim alienage during the final Battle of Denerim, so it's essentially useless. At that point, the staves you're using on your mages are far better. I have no idea who decided to place this staff in the final battle. That's so dumb. 1 out of 5 due to this extremely poor placement choice. Otherwise, I would have loved it for the early and mid game and given it a 3. Oak Branch is tier 4, deals nature damage, and grants +1 magic, +2 constitution, and +10% nature damage. You can obtain this staff either as a reward from the Grand Oak, or by killing it in the Bristolian Forest as part of the Nature of the Beast main quest. Due to being a nature damage staff, you know the drill. Only good against certain enemy types. It's fine enough as a secondary early staff if you want to use it, though there's basically no nature damage spells other than Stinging Swarm, so the nature damage bonus mostly just applies to your basic attacks. 2 out of 5. Piece of Wood is tier 4, deals physical damage, and grants +1 constitution and +10% nature resistance. This is the staff that the dog can fetch for you from any location. Since it's tier 4, it does fairly good damage in the early game, especially since you can easily obtain it either during the Human Noble origin or right after Ostagar when you recruit the dog. But other than that, it will easily get outclassed by any staff that has actual offensive bonuses. 2 out of 5. Pyromancer's Brand is tier 2, deals fire damage, and grants +1 spell power and +10% fire damage. You can buy this from Owen in Redcliffe. This is a surprisingly good staff for the early and mid game if you aren't using DLC items, because of the fire damage attacks and bonus to fire damage. Perfect to fry Darkspawn and Undead with it. 3 out of 5. Shaperit's Blessing is tier 6, deals cold damage, and grants +2 willpower, +0.5 combat mana regen, and +10% cold damage. It's supposed to be a reward in the Orzammar side quest The Shaper's Life, if your warden is a mage, but it's bugged in the vanilla game and isn't obtainable. But if you have Quinn's Fixback, it's properly implemented. It's decent since it gives you a bit of extra mana and mana regen, has cold basic attacks, and improves the damage of the staff and of your cold spells. This is a good option to give to Morrigan since her robes also have a bonus to cold damage, so you could specialize her somewhat into cold spells. 3 out of 5. Staff of the Ephemeral Order is tier 6, deals physical damage, and grants +3 willpower and +5% spirit damage. You can buy this from Alarith in the Denerim Alienage after you solve the situation there during the Landsmeet. But it's bad. Really bad. And it's expensive too, 18 gold and 70 silver. Plus 3 willpower just means plus 15 mana, and the 5% spirit damage isn't worth it. 1 out of 5. Staff of the Magister Lord is tier 7, deals cold damage, and grants plus 6 willpower, plus 2 combat mana regen, plus 6 spell power, and plus 10% to spirit and fire damage. You can buy this from the Quartermaster in the Circle Tower for a humongous 128 gold and 88 silver. This is another one of those premium items that's very powerful but also very expensive. I would have found it way better if its basic attacks dealt fire damage, since it has that fire damage bonus. Sure, it has a large bonus to spell power, plus 30 mana from the willpower bonus, and a very nice plus 2 mana regen that allows you to keep haste up on its own, but I'd still pick Final Reason and sometimes even Winter's Breath over it. 5 out of 5 though, since it is one of the top staves. Sylvan's Mercy is tier 4, deals nature damage, and grants plus 5% nature resistance, plus 1 spell power, and plus 10% nature damage. You can buy it from Bodan in the party camp for almost 9 gold, but don't. It's just another shitty nature staff, though at least this one has a tiny bit of spell power. Not enough to make it good though. 1 out of 5. Torch of Embers is tier 3, deals fire damage, and grants plus 10% fire resistance, plus 3 spell power, and plus 10% fire damage. You can buy it from the Wonders of Thedas in Denerim. This is a better Pyromancer's brand, and definitely worth the early trip to Denerim to pick it up if you're using fire spells. Despite being low tier, it's just very good because fire is so useful against Darkspawn and Undead. 4 out of 5. Wilhelm's Magus Staff is tier 2, deals physical damage, and grants plus 3 willpower, plus 25% fire resistance, and plus 10% fire and electricity damage. You can obtain this if you make a deal with Kitty during the Stone Prisoner DLC. It's not good enough to be worth making a deal for unless you do that as a role-playing choice. Plus 15 mana and fire res, which a mage doesn't need. The fire and electricity damage bonuses are nice, but you can get these from other staves, gloves, and accessories, so it's not enough. 2 out of 5. Winter's Breath, in 2 words, is tier 7, deals cold damage, and grants plus 25% cold resistance, plus 15% cold damage, and radiates cold. You can obtain this as part of the Warden's Keep DLC. It's fine enough to use on a mage who uses cold spells a lot, like potentially Morrigan, but the second version of this staff is better, so I don't quite know why this slightly shittier version was added to the DLC. 3 out of 5. Winter's Breath, in 1 word, is tier 7, deals cold damage, and grants plus 25% cold resistance, plus 3 spell power, plus 10% cold damage, and radiates cold. You can buy this from the Wonders of Thedas in Denerim for a bit over 31 gold. The radiates cold effect, by the way, does nothing, it's just a visual frozen effect. Though this staff has the cold damage bonus lower by 5% than the previous staff, it's better due to the spell power bonus. It's very easy to get a total of 30% cold damage, especially on Morrigan, who gets 10% from her basic robes, or 20% from her robes of possession, which you can get from her personal quest. And of course, for non-Morrigan mages, you always have the Ashen Gloves that grant plus 20%, bringing you up to the 30% cap. The previous staff is free, but slightly worse, so if I have a cold mage, I will usually fork over the 31 gold for this version for that juicy spell power. 4 out of 5. And here we have it. With the staves done, I have scored all the weapons and shields in Dragon Age Origins. If you've stuck with me so far for this absolute monster of a video, thank you so much. I know I personally loved making this because I love researching and analyzing things about one of my special interests, but it boggles my mind when I see that other people actually enjoy watching this kind of stuff too. If you're wondering about Shales crystals, I will rank those separately in another video where I'll rank all the accessories and miscellaneous items, including dog items, Shales crystals, consumables, and special ammunition. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look and scoring of all the weapons in Dragon Age Origins. If you're looking forward to more videos about Dragon Age and other games I like, do be sure to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.